Ayer, Bach, Brackett, Buckner-Webb, Cameron, Davis, Durst, Fulcher, Getty, Guthrie, Hagedorn, Hyder, Hill, Johnson, Keogh, Lacey, Lakey, Lodge, Martin, McKenzie, Mortimer, Nonini, Nuxel, Patrick, Pierce, Rice, Schmidt, Sidaway, Stennett, Thane, Tippett, Fick, Work, Winder, Cameron, Getty, Keogh, Lodge, Mortimer,
Roll call shows 31 present, 4 absent, excused. Quorum being present, Senate is in order. Senate will advance the second order of business, prayer by Chaplain James Weberding and Pledge of Allegiance. We'd ask our friends in the gallery to rise and join us in prayer.
Good morning. You know, the ancient book of Proverbs says, do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it is in your power to act. And I know that's why you're here, so I'm going to pray this week especially that you're able to maintain the insight and strength to continue to do that. Please join me as I pray. Dear God, just as persistently as the granite fingers of the Sawtooth Mountains point heavenward, the good people of this state continue to point to needs that this body must address. And as the Payette River finds its way through the hills, so these senators chip away at the landscape and find a path forward for each issue. So as they do that again for another week, I just ask that you will bless and guide them as they practice the wisdom of that good proverb to not withhold good when it is in their power to act. I pray that you will guide them and bless their efforts. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. We'll now be led in the Pledge of Allegiance by our page, Madison McDaniel. Madison.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Senators Getty and Senators Keogh will be recognized at this order of business. Senate advance third order of business, reading corrections journal.
February 11th, 2013, the Judiciary and Rules Committee reports that the Senate Journal of the proceedings of February 8th, 2013 was read and approved as corrected. Lodge, Chairman.
Report will be filed in the office of Secretary. Senator Davis.
Mr. President, personal privilege if I may.
You have the floor.
Mr. President, Senators, I need to give you a roadmap. We're going to be doing things a little different today. Today is the 36th legislative day, the last day in which non-privileged committees can introduce legislation, which means we'll need to come back this afternoon. It is our intent to go straight from the third order of business, the order of business we are currently in, and go to the 10th order of business. When we hit the 10th order of business, it is my intent to request this floor's consideration to allow me to reorder the legislation in the 10th order. It will be my intent to make a unanimous consent request to reorder the bills to put the gubernatorial appointment of Joan Hurlock to the Idaho Fish and Game Commission at the top of the order, followed by the other legislation and appointments as they currently lie. It will then be our intent to pick up the nomination of Joan Hurlock at that time. and allow the floor's consideration of that nomination. I would remind you that today is also February the 11th, and we have also scheduled, starting at 11:45, our Lincoln Day celebration. And although I do not want you to in any fashion feel constrained in sharing your debate on the gubernatorial appointment, I do want to at least remind you that we have that matter as well to do this morning. After we finish our work this morning, I do not anticipate we'll do anything else in the 10th order of business unless I have misjudged the time, nor do I intend to go into the 13th order of business and pick up any of that legislation today. We do intend to return this afternoon at 4 p.m. I realize that we have committees that will be listening to the input of the public. When we come in at 4, I can tell you that we will be limiting our work to the following orders of business this afternoon, and they deal principally with the introduction and advancement of legislation, 5, 6, 9, and 11, and maybe 12 if I can have confidence that I have an understanding of what's going to happen in second reading. There will, however, be no debate in the 10th order of business or in the 13th order of business this afternoon. Once we complete our work this afternoon, we will adjourn until tomorrow morning. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to advance to the 10th order of business.
Prior to advancing, Senators Mortimer and Senators Cameron will be recorded present to this order of business. Without objection, the Senate advance 10th order of business. Senate's at the 10th order of business, motions and considerations of petitions, resolutions, and memorials. Senator Davis.
Mr. President, is the gubernatorial appointment of Joan Hurlock to the Idaho Fish and Game Commission in this order of business?
It is.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the items of work in the 10th order of business be reordered, placing Joan Hurlock to the Idaho Fish and Game Commission at the top of the 10th order of business, followed by the concurrent resolutions and gubernatorial appointments as they currently lie.
Without objection, the calendar will be so reordered, and the Senate has for final consideration the report of the Resources Environment Committee on the appointment of Joan Hurlock to the Fish and Game Commission. The Secretary will read the report.
February 6, 2013, the Resources and Environment Committee reports it has had under consideration the gubernatorial appointment of Joan Veronica Hurlock to the Idaho Fish and Game Commission, term to expire June 30, 2016. The committee recommends that said appointment not be confirmed by the Senate. Pierce Chairman.
Mr. President.
Senator Hyder.
Mr. President, I move the Senate adopt the committee report.
Hearing no second.
Mr. President,
Senator
I second
Cameron.
the motion.
It's been moved and seconded that the Senate adopt the committee report. Senator Hyder is recognized to open debate on the committee report.
Mr. President, thank you for the privilege today of visiting this issue on the appointment of Joan Hurlock to the Fish and Game Commission. In a short time, perhaps now, perhaps a short time in the future, the good senator from 1 is going to present an appointment relative to Brett Rubenheimer on the Blind and Visually Impaired Commission. I just want to spend a couple of minutes on that appointment. I want to tell you about Brett Rubenheimer. She's a lady that's blind, and on that commission, 3 people that are blind or visually impaired need to be on that commission so that that commission understands the perspective of what the blind and visually impaired do. And I want to just share with you a couple of my observations in visiting with Britt. When she cooks an egg, like most of us do, we just reach in the pan, we scoop it out with our spatula, we flip it over, and the egg is done. Imagine, if you will, if you couldn't see. And so she puts her egg in a tuna fish can and puts it in the frying pan. And then when it's time to flip the egg, she pulls the can off, flips the egg, and sets the can back down on the egg so that she knows where in the pan the egg is. This woman scuba dives. I would submit that she, because of her blindness, is fit to be on the Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired. She has the experience of being blind, and that qualifies her to understand the way blind people feel. By contrast, most of us who sit in this room would probably be great appointments to almost any commission that the gentleman on the second floor would appoint us to. But experience, to me, is tremendously important. I have, like many of you, have sat in a duck blind. I've watched geese come in on my decoys. I've sat over bear bait waiting for a black bear to come. I've chased cougars with hounds and treed the cougar. I've shot deer and elk my whole life as a young man and as an old man, and I've taught my sons how to hunt, how to be in the mountains, how to prepare game. We've packed out elk and deer on our horses for years. I've had tremendous experiences in the mountains relative to hunting and fishing and outdoor activities. And I think those experiences are what give people the background they need to help make decisions. Relative to this appointment, Mrs. Herlock has had no experience in hunting. She's had a great deal of experience talking with people that have hunted or reading books about hunting, but until this year, she had no hunting license. She did take the hunter education course with her sons, and she'd like to become a hunter education instructor, which I admire and think is wonderful. But she has no experience in the field. I think that experience is tremendously important to being appointed to a commission to represent the values and views that hunters in our region experience. Without that experience, I don't know how we make those decisions, because they're based primarily upon our experiences in life. So if you haven't shared those experiences, I don't think you can make the correct decisions relative to what those decisions are. Over the weekend, I've had lots of people call me. In fact, for the last 7 months, I've had lots of people call me. People have been concerned about this appointment. They feel like if she's on the Fish and Game Commission, that our region of the Fish and Game will not have a voice because of her lack of background. I've had people that aren't concerned about Fish and Game necessarily call me. One man called me the other night about 10 o'clock, and he said, if she didn't have long hair, you'd appoint her. I submit to you, good senators, that gender or religion have no bearing whatsoever on this appointment. I know women throughout our valley that hunt and fish and are in the outdoors and probably are just as good, if not better, marksmen and fishermen than their husbands are. So gender or religion have no bearing. I had a call over the weekend. In fact, I had 4 calls over the weekend from the president of the Republican Women of Idaho, who suggested that we don't confirm Joan Herlock to this commission. I'm not going to go into the reasons. I certainly don't want to belittle Mrs. Herlock in any way, except to say she is not qualified. Her husband and her son received elk tags in 2010, which instead of going and filling, they turned back in for a second drawing. They're not a hunting family. She began an organization with her husband called the Wounded Warrior Hunting Organization in Buell, Idaho. To date, 41 people have come to hunt with that Wounded Warrior Foundation. How many has she met? 4. She's not involved in the process that she and her husband organized to bring wounded warriors to Idaho, named in recognition of her stepson. The people that form that organization and manage that organization are very unhappy with her performance relative to that. The sportsmen of my district have called for 7 months for this appointment not to be confirmed. My responsibility as the senator representing them is to acquiesce to the wishes of the sportsmen in my district who feel they will not have a voice on the Fish and Game Commission if this appointment is confirmed. I think I'll save the rest for my conclusion. Mr. President, with that, the debate is open.
For the debate on the committee report, Senator Bracco.
Thank you, Mr. President. For a substitute motion.
Motion is in order.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate approve the appointment of Joan Hurlock to the Idaho Fish and Game Commission.
I have a motion on the floor.
Second the motion.
Senate, been moved and seconded for a substitute motion to confirm the appointment of Joan Hurlock to the Fish and Game Commission. Senator Brackett is recognized to open debate on the substitute motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senators, Senate confirmation is an important process in the selection of a Fish and Game Commissioner. It's a very important part and not to be taken lightly, but it needs to be done thoroughly and fairly. Process matters. It does in the appointment and it does in the confirmation. Process matters of all places. It matters in the Senate. Process matters in the Senate because that's what keeps the Senate running smoothly, because that's what ensures that every senator is treated fairly. The process matters in the Senate because it ensures every senator gets an equal opportunity to achieve their goals. Process matters because that's what holds the Senate together as a body and allows it to function as an institution. The process for selection of Fish and Game Commissioner started with submitting applications to an interview committee. That committee is not required by statute or by rule, but it's an additional voluntary process that the gentleman on the second floor has utilized to provide additional input by sportsmen in the selection of new commissioners. To my knowledge, no other commission or council has been afforded this opportunity. The committee consisted of 2 retiring commissioners, Gary Powers and Wayne Wright, 2 sportsman group leaders, Mark Bell and Jack Euler, whose groups combined represent over 15,000 sportsmen. 1 longtime sportsman, Dyke Nally, who also chaired the committee. 1 member from the Department of Agriculture, State Veterinarian Bill Barton. He deals with wildlife disease interaction with domestic livestock. And there was 2 employees from the office of the gentleman on the second floor. Bonnie Butler, Senior Special Assistant on Natural Resources, and Tyler Mallard, Special Assistant. So Senators, 5 of the 8 were certainly bona fide sportsmen. The interview committee was given the completed applications of 8 candidates. 7 candidates showed up for interviews, which were conducted on the same day and were asked the same pre-agreed upon questions. The committee voted, and the top 3 vote-getters' names were submitted to the gentleman on the second floor in no particular order, as was the request. Joan Hurlock received 8 votes, as did 1 other candidate, and the third received 6 votes. The gentleman on the second floor then made his selection, and Joan Hurlock was notified on June 26th. The official oath was notarized on July 5th. Official acceptance notice was date stamped in the office on July 17th. Soon after, there was a flyer that I received, postmarked July 25th. This flyer was widely distributed and has affected the confirmation process. This flyer was paid for by Shafted Sportsman. This flyer has helped generate many calls and emails at the time and in the 6-7 months since then. It spearheaded the effort to deny Joan Hurlock confirmation to the Fish and Game Commission. Mr. President, may I read from this flyer?
Having identified the source, the senator may read.
This is the flyer that was sent out. And I'll just read one short part of it, Mr. President, and thank you. Governor Otter met with sportsmen before being elected and promised a transparent process in selecting Fish and Game commissioners, one that would integrate a board of 8 to 12 sportsmen to evaluate each candidate. The applicant with the highest rating would then be appointed. But our governor has pulled a fast one with this appointee. Joan Hurlock was rated third by a panel of sportsmen and should never have been passed on as one being remotely qualified in this position. What happened? End of the quote. Senators, these are very strong statements, and they are untrue in many respects. Joan Hurlock went through a transparent interview committee process and was unanimously recommended as a qualified candidate. What happened? What went wrong? Why are we here at this point? I submit there has been an attempt to skew the confirmation process. It started with the flyer, and it has resulted in many calls and emails being received by the Resource and Environment Committee and many others, many of you. Many of the calls and emails have been sour grapes. If you read the code, it says, shall be well informed upon and interested in the subject of wildlife conservation and restoration. The code does not say more qualified or most qualified. It says informed upon and interested in the subject of wildlife conservation and restoration. Many want to hold Joan Hurlock to a higher standard or a different standard. If they want to do that, then we should change the statute. A lot of this has been driven by a vocal minority who did not get their guy appointed. It has resulted in a lot of public input. Public input is an important part of the process. We should consider public input, but senators, we should be fair and objective. I have personally talked or heard from every one of the interview committee members, and they all have said they think that it is a good process. If you like the process, if you participate in the process, you need to respect the results. You need to accept the results. Take away the sour grapes. Take away, my guy did not get the appointment. Take away the more qualified or most qualified. Then we are faced with voting our conscience or voting our constituents. Just as we are when we are faced with many difficult issues, we must consider what is really best for the Fish and Game Commission, for wildlife hunters, and for the state. I know that is what my seatmate, my good friend, and many other members of the Senate will consider. They may reach different conclusions, and I respect that. I have friends on both sides, and I'm going to stay with my friends. what is best for the Fish and Game Department? I think many of us would agree that some changes need to be made. Mr. President, may I read from a Fish and Game report, Idaho Fiscal Facts, and from JFAC, or the 2013 JFAC presentation?
Senator, is it? It's not action out of the committee. It's a report that's out. It's not information from the committee.
Mr. President, no, it's not.
Okay, Senator may read.
Thank you, Mr. President. The first is 2012 Idaho Fiscal Facts by LSO. And I'm focusing on hunting because that seems to be the main focus of the input that we've had. But Idaho resident hunting license and tag sales in 2012 was 61,621. In 2012, that's 10 years later, the sales were 57,086. In 2003, the average age of the resident license buyers was 40.96. And in 2012, the average age of resident license buyers was 42.08. And then, Mr. President, reading from the JFAC presentation. Over the past 20 years, our population has increased by 57%, or 600,000 people. Our license sales, however, have only increased by 14.5%, or 46,000. Much of this lack of growth is attributed to increased urbanization. We are concerned about this trend and preference of our younger generation to entertain themselves with a multitude of electronic devices rather than firsthand experience in the outdoors. As a result, our resident license base had narrowed to a smaller segment of the citizenry. End of the quote. But to summarize, this past decade, resident hunting license and tag sales have decreased by 7.4%. The average age of resident license buyers has increased by 2.7%. So tag sales are decreasing, age is increasing. Albert Einstein once said, "Insanity is continuing to do the same thing and expecting different results." Joan Herlock has some ideas on how to address this problem. Mr. President, may I read from Mrs. Herlock's application?
Having identified the source, Senator may read.
Thank you, Mr. President. And the question is, why would you like to serve on the Fish and Game Commission? And the answer given, I would like to serve on the commission to ensure a perpetual supply of wildlife for future generations. Educating our youth on responsible harvesting practices is extremely important, and I wholeheartedly support hunter education for children and for adults alike. Idaho's legacy of hunting and fishing and trapping needs to be preserved. The future of hunters and wildlife depends on our youth and doing a better job in getting them involved. It has been rumored that the gentleman on the second floor has asked Joan Herlock to withdraw from the appointment. Mr. President, may I read from the transcript of the gentleman's answer to that question at the February 9th, 2013 Idaho Press Club?
Having identified the source, Senator may read.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is the transcript, and it was prepared by my attaché. Thank you, Mr. President. And this is in response to the question, did you ask Joan Herlock to withdraw to withdraw her nomination. And the quote is his conversation with her. And the quote is, "Look, this is not going to be pretty, but I think you're qualified. I think you would be a good Fish and Game Commissioner. If you want to stay in this, I'm with you." So whatever rumors are going around that I had asked her to step down, that is not true. With that, Mr. President, debate is open.
Senators, I just want to clarify, the original motion to adopt the committee report is now being superseded by the substitute motion. And I'm going to rule if this motion, the substitute motion, passes, the original motion is void. So if you are interested in debating the original motion, I highly suggest you enter into debate at this point in time. Debate is open. Is there further debate on the substitute motion? Senator Cameron.
Mr. President, for a parliamentary inquiry.
You make the inquiry, Senator.
Mr. President, then what happens with the committee report?
The committee report would be deemed void, and the action would be over. The candidate would be confirmed, and the process would be.
So the committee report would be filed and
Office of the Secretary.
not approved by the floor, is your ruling?
The rules say that the adoption of the committee report is an affirmative action, Rule 42, and without adopting the committee report, action by the floor to confirm would deal the committee report null and void, and the process would be finished.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Further debate.
Mr. President, to speak in opposition to the substitute motion.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, Senators, this really messes up my debate here today, but I'm going to cut to the quick here. I'm going to tell you exactly what happened as far as this senator is concerned, and there were several other senators and representatives involved in how I got to where I am today. I didn't know Joan Hurlock from Adam until last summer at the Republican convention, when I was standing in a lunch line with several people in front of us, and several of us legislators had gone to lunch that day. While standing in that line, Representative Bedke stuck his finger in my chest, looked at the lady in the eye standing next to me, and said, "This guy is going to be your worst nightmare." Usually I'm pretty quick on my feet. Usually I have a comeback. I didn't to that one. I just stood there. And I looked at him as he turned and walked away. And I turned to that lady. And I said, "What was that all about? Are you an employee? Are you on a commission, an agency? What was that all about?" And she said, "I was just recently appointed to the Fish and Game Commission." So I extended my hand and I said, "Congratulations. I served on that commission too." And as we stood in line waiting, I said to her, "So what do you think about wolves?" Her reply was, "They have their place." Fine. So we stood there and I said, "So are you a hunter?" She said, "No." I let it go. Then I said, "Are you a fisherman?" She said, "No." So I thought, I just better quit asking this lady any questions. So we got our lunch, and we went over and sat down at a big round table, and there were about 6 legislators there, a couple of them from that valley, from that region. And I said, "What's going on here?" And none of them had an answer. I said, okay, tomorrow we're going to get the answers. Same time, same place. We needed to invite a couple of more representatives from that region to be there with us. I said, I'll have our lieutenant governor here. So the next day, same time, same place, we met at that table. As soon as we sat down, and if I didn't apologize then, I apologize now, Lieutenant Governor, but I went right after him. What the heck is going on here? This lady is not qualified. What have you done? And he said, wait a minute, I haven't done anything. Well, you have to understand the Lieutenant Governor's and I relationship. It's a long, long relationship. And I went right after him again, you know, thinking, what are you hiding here? Why aren't you coming forward? Why aren't you telling us? He started getting mad at me, and I could see him how he does. His face gets red sometimes, and he sits up in his chair, and it's kind of a feed or flight deal. Well, he's not going to flee from me. So he said, you got to stop. You're wrong. You're wrong. He said, this was done through a different process. I didn't have anything to do with it. It was sent to a committee, and the committee ran that process. And the committee is the one that sent the selections forward. It was nothing to do with me. So then I'm knowing myself and my personality, I know I really begged for his forgiveness for thinking ill of him. But we left that table that day, and we decided I didn't want the legislators from that region or legislators from any region just taking my word for what had transpired the day before. So we said, look, you better set up a meeting, and we'll come and meet with this lady, and we'll have an interview to see where she is. So about a week following that meeting, the legislators, a few of them from that area, met with her. And I talked to two of those legislators after that meeting. And they're here today, and they can tell you what transpired there if that's pertinent to this discussion. Senator Bear and I were not able to attend that meeting. So we set up a meeting about a week following the first meeting to meet Ms. Herlock in Pocatello. We selected a restaurant. I picked Senator Bear up in Blackfoot. We drove to Pocatello. We drove to the restaurant. We walked in the door of the restaurant, and when we walked in the door of the restaurant, there stood the director of the Department of Fish and Game. I looked at Senator Bear and I said, what the heck is going on here? Let's just turn around and go. He grabbed me and stopped me, and by the time he stopped me, the director was right in the middle of us, shaking our hands and welcoming us and all of the platitudes that go along with that. So we went in and we had our interview. And Senator Bear did a very good job on keeping that a professional interview. But all I wanted to hear from her was her experience in hunting and fishing. And as we sat there at that table and finished our lunch, and as I delved into that, she admitted to us that she wasn't a fisherman, and that she had hunted once in her life and shot 2 whistle pigs. And a whistle pig is a rock chuck to most of us folks out here. So she said she had gone hunting with her husband, deer hunting, a couple of times, but she had not hunted. Now if we wouldn't have gotten to where we are today with the substitute motion, which I urge you to vote no against, I wanted to tell you about my experience, about my life experience, about my being on the commission and about how important it is to have an independent commission, not someone that has been solicited by the Department of Fish and Game and coached by the Department of Fish and Game before these important interviews. Joan Hurlock of today is not the Joan Hurlock that we met last summer. Totally different person when it comes to her knowledge about hunting and fishing. The issue was raised then, and the issue that's raised now are different issues. To me, they're different issues. The passion that a hunter and a fisherman has, the love that draws you out there, that makes you want to forbid your family until they're old enough, walk away and leave them so that you can go hunting and you can go fishing for days and weeks at a time. The passion that she has for hunting and fishing in Idaho is not there. I submit it is not there. The passion for children is there. This is an intelligent woman. She is well informed. She's a quick study. She has all of those elements that make her good on almost anything. Her passion for hunting and fishing, I submit to you, is not there. Thank you, Senators.
For the debate. Hearing no further debate, Senator Durst.
Mr. Chairman, would the senator from 35 yield to a question?
Senator Sidaway.
I will.
Senator Durst for the inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator. I listened to your debate, Senator, and I appreciate what you've had to say. Being raised in a family of hunters and fishers, we've been around that a lot. I consider myself a pretty active sportsman, despite the fact that I've got children that prevent me from getting out as often as I'd like. But what I'd like to know from you is you talk about the passion for hunting and fishing, and reviewing the mission of the IDFG, seems that their mission is broader than hunting and fishing. Can you explain to me why, from your perspective, that is such a critical component, why other aspects of that job wouldn't be just as necessary?
Senator Sidaway.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good Senator, I'll do my best. Our Constitution says that we'll protect, promote, and perpetuate hunting and fishing for the benefit of hunters and fishermen, for the benefit of the hunters and the fishermen. A lot of times that doesn't get read all the way, the whole paragraph. And I can see someone that doesn't have that passion acquiescing to support things in the department, because the department effectively is charged to watch over all wildlife in the state. But I can see that and when I was on the commission, there were times when you have competing species within that commission, and how you're going to manage one species affects another species. And if you're not, passionate about protecting that right to hunt and fish, you may say, well, we've got to protect species A over species B, when species A is not a hunted species. And where does that leave the hunter and fisherman? It leaves them out of that equation. So I guess that's where my passion comes from, is in the protection of that right to hunt and fish.
For the debate, Senator Patrick.
Mr. President, to debate in favor of the motion.
You have the floor.
Thank you. This candidate is from my district. She does vote. She's been very involved in the Central Committee for the past several years. And from my experience with her, she is very diligent, very capable, and very smart. Now, I've been fairly quiet on this issue, and I've listened to all the debate. I've listened to all the people it's called, left messages, and read all the emails. And I have both, people for and against. And so I have to look at this in one way. Was the process followed or not? And there were 8 people on the committee that chose the person. They were all 8 did support her. So if she is not capable, why would all 8 support her? I have to think about that. And the current commission that she served with 6 months supports her. So out of her 4-year term, she's only got 3.5 years left. So I guess you can say there's time to do bad or good. I guess I think of her as a breath of fresh air in being a little different. And she does support the youth. I think she can bring youth into the hunting and fishing mold. And she has worked with 4-H groups and other groups trying to encourage them. I just think she should be supported. Thank you.
Senator Tippett.
Mr. President, to debate.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senators, I stand to speak in support of the motion to confirm Joan Hurlock to the Fish and Game Commission. But I want to make it clear that during the course of my remarks, if I refer to behavior that you may think is inappropriate on the part of others, that I am in no way referring to my Senate colleagues. I do have some concerns about some of the things that have happened since Joan was appointed to the commission last summer, but again, they do not involve members of this body. Excuse me. I started receiving calls expressing concerns about the appointment of Joan to the commission shortly after that appointment was made last summer. The interesting thing to me is that the nature of the accusations have changed. They've been a bit of a moving target from that time until now. I was initially told of serious accusations regarding the selection process, that important information had been withheld from the selection committee, and that other irregularities in the selection process had occurred. I've talked to the parties involved, and I've satisfied myself that nothing inappropriate occurred. The accusations that were made have not been defended. I was later told that Joan Hurlock had never possessed an Idaho license to hunt and fish until after applying for the job on the commission. That also turned out to be false. There was a period of time when Ms. Hurlock didn't have a license, but I believe that under the circumstances she was going through at that time, that's completely understandable, and others may want to address that. Then I was told that Joan Hurlock was recruited by the Department of Fish and Game to seek appointment to the commission. And the concern was that having been recruited by the department, she would be nothing more than a rubber stamp to their policies. That's also false. Joan first heard about the vacancy on the commission from the leader of their local 4-H shotgun club in which Joan had been involved. The leader thought that she would be an excellent commissioner and suggested that she apply for the position. Mr. President, may I have approval to read briefly from a communication from that 4-H leader?
You may, Senator, having identified the source.
Thank you, Mr. President. He says this: I've known Joan Hurlock and her husband, Matt Bridges, since 2004. I had all 4 family members in my hunter education class, and in 2011, they joined our 4-H shotgun club prior to her expressing any interest in the Fish and Game Commission. In April 2012, our 4-H club was assisting fish and game volunteers on a habitat restoration project north of King Hill. I was discussing the imminent retirement of Commission Chairman Wayne Wright with Region 4 Supervisor Jerome Hansen. Supervisor Hansen told me there were several prospective candidates, and as he described the attributes that the future commissioner should possess, I suggested that he talk to Joan Hurlock, so I introduced the 2 of them. And he goes on to talk about his support for her. That's how she became aware of the vacancy on the commission, and that's how she came to meet representatives from the department. So the opposition now focuses on their contention that Ms. Hurlock is not qualified to serve as a Fish and Game Commissioner, and the others who applied were more qualified. Well, Senators, this has been an interesting situation for me, and it's given me reason to ponder the responsibility that we have as the Idaho Senate to confirm or withhold confirmation of gubernatorial appointees. I've asked myself, is it our responsibility to ensure that the governor selected the most qualified candidate from the pool of candidates? I don't think so. In order to do that, we would have to become very knowledgeable on all of the candidates that applied. I don't think that's what was intended. I think our responsibility is to deny confirmation if the appointment were made for inappropriate reasons, or if the candidate obviously were not qualified. Joan Hurlock may very well have been the most qualified candidate. I don't know that she was, but I don't know that she wasn't either. But frankly, it doesn't matter to me whether she was or not. I ask myself if she's qualified to do the job and if it was appropriate for the gentleman on the second floor to appoint her. Let me just review with you a list of some of the qualifications that Joan has. She has a lifelong love for the outdoors. Her father was a fish and game warden in California, I believe it was. She talks about going with him often, and part of the reason that she's interested in this position is to honor the memory of her father, and because she grew up with that kind of a background. She's a lifetime member of the NRA. She's a past member of Ducks Unlimited. She's a lifetime member of Front Sight. She's a member of Sportsmen for Fish and Wildlife. She's a parent helper with the Boy Scouts of America. She took hunter education with her children about 5 years ago and says she has taken them fishing since they were small children. As I previously mentioned, she was involved with the 4-H shooting club before she ever considered applying for the Fish and Game Commission position. She has a background in law enforcement. She worked as a federal police officer in Washington, D.C. as a member of the United States Capitol Police. Part of what the Department of Fish and Game does is law enforcement, and a very important part. I think that's a nice background for a commissioner to have. She has a Bachelor of Science degree in forensic science. She studied biology, botany, and zoology. And I think an academic background, that's well suited for a position on the commission. She can read the technical stuff from the biologists and the game managers and understand what it says. She has a love for children and a desire to get them involved in and learn to love hunting and fishing. I don't know about you, Senators, but I think she has an impressive resume and that she's well qualified for the position. But I don't really know, I guess, what it takes to make a really good Fish and Game Commissioner. I don't think a lifetime of hunting and fishing necessarily qualifies you. I talked to Tony McDermott in a private conversation, and I asked him if I could share with you our conversation. He said yes. Tony is a member of the Fish and Game Commission now. He's the past president of the commission. We were talking about Joan having read the wildlife management plans. And I said to Tony, Tony, have you read all that stuff? He said, are you kidding me? Nobody reads that stuff except for Joan. I've got copies of it, and I refer to them when I need to, but I don't know of anybody that's read that stuff other than Joan. I said, Tony, do all of the commissioners support her? Now, this was a private conversation. He could tell me candidly what he really thought and what they thought. He said every one of them, every single one of them. Then the $64,000 question, I said, Tony, is she qualified to be a Fish and Game Commissioner? He said to me, she is extremely well qualified. I don't know of anybody that's ever been so well qualified. Now, I've heard from a lot of people that oppose the appointment, most of them from one area of the state. But I've heard from a lot now that support her appointment as well. I wasn't involved in the conversation that the senator from 35 alluded to. I was involved in another conversation where she was asked about her views on wolves, and I took some notes. And this is what she said. The question to her was, what are your core convictions about wolves? Her response was that they were introduced against Idaho's will, and we have responsibility in law to keep 15 packs, is what she understands. But she supports the right to kill wolves when they're harassing animals, and that the numbers need to be managed down to appropriate numbers. They need to be kept in balance. I think that's what the commission says. We've got to keep those numbers down. We know that we've got a responsibility mandated to us to keep a certain number in the state. Were you opposed to wolf introduction? She said, I don't think they should have been brought back here. The federal government imposed them on Idaho, and I'm opposed to that type of federal management. I support managing them back to appropriate numbers. When I first met Joan, and that was just recently, I asked her, Joan, I want to ask you a question because I want to be able to tell my constituents what your answer is. Are you committed to preserving the right to hunt, fish, and trap in this state? She said to me, absolutely. Absolutely that she is committed to that. And she wants to get kids involved because she's concerned that they're losing interest. And I hear that from the commission. Well, Senators, is she qualified? In my mind, the answer is a resounding yes. In fact, she brings some very unique qualifications to the position. All 8 of the members of the selection committee listed Joan as one of their top 3 choices. In no specific order, they were told. Now, maybe in some of their minds she was number 3. I don't know. We don't know that, but all of them listed her as one of their choices. Senators, I encourage you to support the motion to confirm Joan Hurlock as a member of the Idaho Fish and Game Commission. I think that she will be a valuable asset, and frankly, I think that she is going to be a great Fish and Game Commissioner in the future, as she has been for these last 6 months. Thank you.
Further debate? Senator Stennett.
Mr. Chairman, to debate in favor of the appointment.
You have the floor, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Senators, as was alluded to, a lot of the difficulty around Joan Hurlock's appointment has to do with whether she has a continuous track record of having fish and game licenses in her activities in hunting and fishing. Now, remember that Joan Hurlock has all the qualifications, as we've just heard, to be a Fish and Game Commissioner. She's met all the requirements and the qualifications that are held in statute. And she brings a fresh energy to inspire youth to learn and be excited about wildlife, hunting, and fishing. And even though having hunting and fishing licenses are not a requirement, I do want to point out what happened in the gap of where she didn't have licenses. She had some from 1999 to about 2002, and then there was a gap before she had them later in the 2000s. And I do want to mention that I did ask Ms. Hurlock's permission to let you know what happened during this period of time. Ms. Hurlock's first husband died January 1st, 2002, after a nursing home stay. She was suddenly a single parent with 2 small children, ages 3 and 4.5. She married to Matt Bridges shortly thereafter, and in 2005, she was in a hospital for meningitis during the hunting season. In 2006, her husband Matt had back surgery, and she had to take care of hers and his children. In November of that year, her stepson, Doug, was killed in Iraq. In 2007, Matt acquired West Nile virus. It took him a year to recover. In 2011, Ms. Hurlock had foot surgery. She was in a wheelchair for some period of time, then a scooter, then a walking boot. In between all this, Ms. Hurlock was had mentored her children in hunting and fishing activities, as we've heard, until they became an age to hunt, which they weren't until just recently. Now, Senators, life throws us curveballs, and our normal routines get interrupted, and we've all had those experiences. Tragedies and illnesses, caring for family, our children, all take precedence over our recreational activities, which sometimes just have to take a back seat. Please vote to confirm Joan Hurlock. She's followed all the qualifications and the recommendations according to statute, and I encourage your aye vote for her appointment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further debate on the substitute motion, Senator Hagedorn.
Thank you, Mr. President. My family has been involved in fish and game issues forever, it seems. When I retired from the Navy, I got involved in fish and game issues as well, because I had seen through the years, my 20 years of service, I would figure out a way to come home and hunt and fish just about every year. And I saw the decline of the game and the decline of management towards that game throughout that career. When I returned, I resolved that I was going to be involved in helping fix that. And part of the issue that we had was sportsmen were scattered all over the place. Everyone had their own idea of how to fix the issue and how to fix the problem. There were few that would come together and agree on how to fix this issue. And I submit that we're seeing that exact same issue in this body this morning. We have a number of folks that agree conclusively that Ms. Hurlock is well qualified to do this job. I don't disagree with that. We have a number of folks that agree that maybe she doesn't have the passion, maybe she doesn't have the history or the experience that it takes. I agree with Senator Tippett in his concerns that here's someone who's stepped up, who's had some issues that have gone on that have kept her out of the field, but she's totally focused and committed to doing this job. But I have received a number of emails, phone calls, personal discussions on both sides of this issue from sportsmen. And at the end of the day, it's the sportsmen that are either going to support or not support this commissioner. And in the last 10 years, we've been very, very fortunate to have people like the gentleman from 35, to have people, the gentleman from the other side of the rotunda, to step up and serve in this probably, in my opinion, the worst possible commission you could serve on in this state. And they've all been able to come together in the last 10 years and start to bring sportsmen together and start to focus more on what sportsmen's needs are. Sportsmen pay for the Department of Fish and Game. No general fund dollars. None. We have an issue that we've already identified. We're selling fewer licenses. Our age of sportsmen are growing. We need to bring sportsmen together to help reverse that trend. Would confirming an appointment that sportsmen are split on reverse that trend? Will it contribute to that? A wise old captain once told me, when you have two sides that are relatively have some very good positions, but they can't seem to come together, it's time to start the process again. Don't pick a winner or a loser because you're going to lose. When you only have half of the group supporting and the other half of the group against, you're not going to win. You're not going to move forward. I think Ms. Herlock is a wonderful person. I appreciate her stepping up to do this. I think she's in a very bad position right now. She's in a position where I don't believe she will be able to bring the sportsmen of her region nor the sportsmen of the rest of the state together because of the circumstances she has been put in. I am very disappointed in the group that I helped start. I was a co-founder of Sportsmen for Fish and Wildlife, and I'm very disappointed in the way that they have treated this nomination. As the good senator from 32 pointed out, this has been a moving target on why she shouldn't be appointed. That shouldn't be. Shouldn't be at all. But it has become that. And we have to deal with that reality. And that reality is sportsmen are split. And we're selecting someone for sportsmen, not for us. We're selecting someone to represent sportsmen. If you believe that she can bring sportsmen together, then confirm this good lady as a commissioner. If you believe that she's got a heck of an uphill climb as I do, then I'm afraid my vote is not against Ms. Herlock. My vote is to start this process again and get someone that can bring sportsmen together and ensure that this commission is going to move forward in a positive direction and not lose the momentum that we've worked so hard to gain in the last 10 years. Thank you, Mr. President.
For the debate, Senator Rice.
Mr. President, members of the Senate, I want to talk just a little bit about passion for hunting and fishing. As I've sat and I've considered this, and I've looked at emails and talked to my friends on both sides of this question, some things come to mind. I'm going to tell you a little bit about passion for hunting and fishing. I know a fellow that has a real passion for hunting and fishing that I wouldn't want on the Fish and Game Commission under any circumstances. His passion for hunting is such that he's received a lifetime ban because his passion leads him to violate court orders telling him not to hunt. That's not the basis on which we select commissioners. I'm also going to tell you a little bit about myself. I do not have a passion for hunting. I shot all kinds of whistle pigs and jackrabbits as a teenager. But I have a reason I don't hunt deer or elk. I don't like to eat it. I like to leave it for those that enjoy the meat. I'm not particularly a great fisherman. I take my 11-year-old. I've had a fishing license a couple of years out of the last several. I have a brother who's a very good fisherman, goes regularly. I have a passion, though, for protecting those rights for other Idahoans. I didn't hear from the discussions that other members have had anything about Ms. Herlock's passion for protecting those rights for others. It's something we should consider. We have a tendency sometimes to pick an issue or pick a behavior and latch everything onto it. Sometimes it's wise, and more frequently that's not wise. Just like it wouldn't be wise to appoint that fellow I referred to first. Be a lousy commissioner. And we're not selecting a commissioner here. We're giving our advice and consent to the governor. We need to consider that. We need to consider the wisdom of our decision, because there's more to it than just the decisions about whether the person likes to hunt or fish. There's budget considerations. Is this a person that's going to have the intelligence to look at a budget that's going to be presented to us and make wise decisions on a budget? Is it a person that will tend to hold the feet to the fire on how the money's spent? Is it being spent in the most appropriate way to protect hunting, fishing, and trapping in the state of Idaho? That's the decision we're about to make. And I think that we need to remember that. Thanks.
For the debate, Senator Lodge.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good senators. You know, many of us have the opportunity to have been born in Idaho, but many of us came to Idaho through the good choices of our parents. They brought us here, and when we wore out a pair of shoes, or they wore out a pair of shoes, we stayed in Idaho and to enjoy all the wonders that we have here. And I happen to be one of those. I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Came to Idaho when I was 4 years old because my father was offered a scholarship at the College of Idaho to play football. His commanding officer was the coach at the College of Idaho, and that's how we got to Idaho. My dad hunted and fished in Pittsburgh, in the Pennsylvania there, even though you might not think they have a great deer population there. When he came here, we grew up with that. There was a shotgun in every corner. I mean, it wasn't any of this lock up your guns things. We grew up with guns. And we grew up hunting. My brother had a gun in his hand from the time he could just barely walk. And it's important to us that we preserve those rights to hunt and fish. I used to shoot ducks and geese off the porch at our home in Sunny Slope. I can't do that any longer because there aren't any ducks flying from Lake Lowell over to the river anymore. The lake used to be full of ducks, and I used to see lots of pheasant and chukar and quail as I drove to school each morning from the country into Caldwell. I don't see that anymore. We feed the quail and the pheasant in the wintertime, to try to and give them some habitat so that they have a chance to live and reproduce. Last year, my brother raised 150 head of chukar, and we had a great time watching them grow from the little tiny chicks. And he released them into the orchards and the area around a farm that he and I own. You know, just last week, Senator Broadsword was here, and she showed us a picture of a couple moose who were grazing in the yard of the Bonner County courthouse in the deep snow. You know, some of us remember the deer grazing on the yard in the annex when we were over there. And how about the goose who was nesting outside Senator Darrington's window? We all enjoyed that. You know, my family, as I said, has been involved in hunting and fishing forever. I used to have a license, and I don't anymore because we raise cattle and we have another source of meat. But as a child, that was the way that we were able to live and have meat. If my father hadn't hunted, we probably wouldn't have had any meat. So I come from a background of hunting and fishing. My husband's family, great hunters and fishers. But now what I like to see is I like to see those elk and deer on the mountainside of our mountain ranch. I like to see the deer grazing in my pasture, and the quail and the pheasants and mother ducks, if you ever see them, the goose and the geese with their babies in the spring. And you all have seen a car stop as the mother led her little babies across the street. Mr. President, what I have to say today about the confirmation of Joan Hurlock has nothing to do with the fact that she's only lived in Idaho for 15 years. How many of us have lived here less than 15 years, but yet we serve in this legislature? So it has nothing to do with the fact that she's only lived here for 15 years. And you know, it's not about having a hunting or a fishing license. It's about bringing a new perspective to that 7-member commission. It's not about the emotion of the issue, nor the special interest of the issue. And I can tell you, since I've been here, one of the things you always hear about is the Fish and Game Commission. You know, you can make 50% of the people happy, and there's always going to be 50% who aren't happy. You know, this is about bringing someone to the commission who does not have a personal agenda except to get young people involved in the out-of-doors and away from those violent video games to enjoy the wonders of Idaho. It's to bring a savvy about seeing our wildlife population, which has decreased, and what can we do to protect, preserve, perpetuate, and manage that Idaho wildlife so that our children and grandchildren have the same opportunities that we have had to enjoy this important resource. It is to increase the science aspect of this management. Ms. Hurlock has a science background. It's about the huge non-hunting element involved who also want to increase Idaho's wildlife, like myself right now. Those who photograph, catch and release, or just enjoy the beauty of the large game animals. You know, not everyone in this state is a catcher or a shooter, but they appreciate excellent management of our wildlife. And remember, that wildlife belongs to all of Idaho. It's about what we have heard from former and current commissioners who support her nomination. And I'd like to read, Mr. President, if I may, from an email that we received from my commissioner, my Fish and Game Commissioner, Bob Barboski. May I read?
Having identified the source, Senator may read.
Thank you, Mr. President. Print's a little small. As commissioners, we have had the opportunity to work with Ms. Hurlock as a commissioner since her appointment last July and have observed that she is in fact a very dedicated and well-qualified individual. As the commissioner from the Southwest District 3, we always need to be mindful that with the many diverse hunting and fishing opportunities we have in Idaho, we come to the commission with an open mind rather than a single interest or opinion. Ms. Hurlock has demonstrated this openness, willingness to work with and listen to sportsmen So I'm asking that you vote in favor of her confirmation. And that was from my commissioner. It's about a willingness to serve on a commission in a thankless position, where, as I said, 50% will be upset no matter what we do. It's about being a volunteer, willing to serve, wanting to bring new ideas from a different perspective, the perspective of a person growing up as a game warden's daughter, a person to ride along with the game wardens, meet with sportsman groups, listen to them, study the management plans, be involved, lead young people to enjoy hunting and fishing, and not at least bring 50% of Idaho citizens, women, into the mix. I also received an email, which I will not read, from one of my constituents, Mike Bradford, who talks about, in his email, about his wife and daughters and their involvement in hunting and fishing, and how sometimes they're treated when they go to into gun shops to get their hunting supplies. That as women, they don't feel that they're looked upon as being the great white hunters that maybe some others are. The experience, when you talk about experience, how many of us had experience when we came into this legislature? I mean, those from the House did, but all of us that came here didn't have experience. And so we've learned on the job. And we've tried to be the best representative for our districts that we can possibly be. We bring new perspectives. You know, in the matter of being transparent, Mr. President, I need to state that under Rule 39, that my brother, Dyke Nally, was the chairman of the selection committee. And I've talked to him a couple times since all this controversy came up about how they did this selection. And Ms. Herlock received 8 out of 8 votes. 8 out of 8 from this group of the selection committee. They asked everyone the same questions. He said that she was well qualified, and he's been on this selection committee or involved in it since Governor Andrus, Governor Batt, Governor Kempthorne, and now Governor Otter. He's been actively involved in fish and game activities. Good senators, with due respect for those that I call friends on the Resources Committee, let's give us a broader perspective on the Fish and Game Commission. Give Ms. Herlock the opportunity to serve just as we serve and learn and become a better servant. So if she serves, and if she does not serve well, that she does serve at the pleasure of the gentleman on the second floor, and he can ask her to resign. So, Mr. President, good senators, she's well qualified according to the bylaws, and I ask that you confirm the appointment of Joan Herlock. Thank you, Mr. President. Good senators.
Senator Cameron.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, senators, I feel a responsibility to stand at least and express my perspective. And I know the good majority leader's probably squirming because we're well past the time that he had set for us. But I do want to tell you, I do appreciate the debate that's taken place on both sides here this morning. I think it's been very respectful, and it's been an appropriate vetting process. I appreciate what the senator from 23 said when he said he had friends on both sides, and I count myself as one of those friends, and appreciate knowing that. It's a very difficult and solemn responsibility that we hold, a very difficult and solemn responsibility that we have in this decision. In my tenure here on this floor, I've not seen very often where this body has decided to go against the wishes of the gentleman on the second floor. We don't normally do that. It has to take some level of concern for us to go there. I have seen it done a time or two, and I can tell you without question, the most controversial debates on this floor over appointments have in large measure been fish and game appointments. It is one of the most, as the good senator from 14 said, it's one of the most controversial, difficult positions to serve in. And to be candid with you, I struggled with this decision. I struggled with the appointment. I struggled with the various meetings that we held with Ms. Hurlock, and I struggled with the decision. I struggled with the decision because the governor appointed her. She's very bright. She's been working very hard to try and get up to speed. There's been some discussion this morning in debate about the process. In fact, there's been a lot of discussion about the process of 8 members interviewing her. And that's a good process, and for the most part, it's worked. I would submit that it maybe didn't work quite as well as it should have this time. Our job is not to rubber stamp the process, just because even if we think the process is good, and even if we think the process is fair, that does not necessarily warrant us just voting to confirm. I'll fill in some of the blanks that the good senator from 35 started. I happened to be at the table at the Republican convention, and I happened to be one of the ones who organized the meeting, along with the good senator from 23 and others in the Magic Valley with Ms. Hurlock. We found her to be very bright, very sincere, but lacking in overall understanding and knowledge of the issues surrounding wildlife and fish and game. In fact, we spent a lot of the meeting coaching her as to, you may not want to say it quite this way, or you may not, trying to figure out just where she was. I know that my good friend here in front of me, who I admire with the greatest respect and rarely are on an opposite side on an issue. But I know in his opinion, and based on the email he received, that he believes that she was not recruited by Fish and Game. But I can tell you that Jerome Hansen, the regional manager from our area, at the table sitting right across from me, and I was sitting next to Ms. Hurlock, admitted that he recruited her. We've had this moving target of information and facts that's been really hard to get our hands on. First, we were told, and she admitted that she did not hunt, she did not fish, that was not her desire. And then we were told, well, she had some, and then she produced a record of her hunting and fishing licenses, and provided that for us. I asked to look at the record. I found it interesting that her application date on this appointment's application was April, I think, 28th, and yet the bulk of the licenses and tags that she's purchased over the years were all purchased in May after her application. Prior to that, she had held a license 3 times. In 2003, she held a fishing license. And in 1999 and in 2000, she held a hunting license. Now, there may be some very legitimate reasons. The senator from 26 addressed some of those reasons. And certainly there are circumstances beyond any person's control. The senator from 26 would know that better than any of us on the floor, that may prevent somebody from buying a license. But I would submit for you that 12 years is quite a substantial difference. My good friend from 23 handed out a handout that indicated the requirements for appointment, the qualifications, and he highlighted a line on there. And Mr. President, he referred to it before. I want to reread it, if I may, Mr. President.
Having identified the source, Senator may read.
It says, the person shall be well informed upon and interested in the subject of wildlife conservation and restoration. So for me, whether or not she's qualified hinges around the terms well-informed. I was with the folks in, as I said before, at the Republican convention, and it was obvious at that point you could not say that she was well-informed on the issues surrounding wolves. When asked recently what her core values would be, she still, in my opinion, could not give an affirmative, strong response to the answer of wolves. She finally did state, as I think the good senator, and I'm sorry, Senator, for not remembering your number, Senator from 32, related her answer, I think, very accurately. She was asked about other subjects. One of them, which unfortunately for me became sort of the deciding point, one of the deciding points, I guess. She was asked about salmon recovery and dam breaching. That was a pretty softball question. The answer was, I don't know much about it. I don't have an opinion. I would submit for this floor that that's not being well informed. That's not meeting within the qualifications that's here. Now, I have to tell you, there's been some allusion to or some comment about whether she's being held to a different standard. I don't believe so. At least for me, she has not been held to a different standard. I would have the same vote no matter who was being appointed if they had that same type of answer. There's been some comments that maybe this is one sportsman's group that is in opposition. And I really encourage you to think carefully about what the good senator from 14 said. I thought his comments were very wise and very appropriate. But I can tell you that I'm not hearing just from one sportsman's group. I'm hearing from the spectrum of individuals who don't belong to any sportsman's group who question this appointment. I don't believe this is just, it's too trite to just say this is sour grapes or our guy didn't get appointed. This goes back to a more fundamental question. And the fundamental question is she well informed? And can she represent the interests of the sportsman community? We would not appoint a non-physician to the medical board. We would not appoint a non-attorney to the bar board or a bar association. We would not appoint individuals who do not have those core convictions and qualifications to that area. We would not appoint a non-accountant to the Board of Accountancy. That's just not what we would do. So for those reasons, Mr. President, I find that this position is not a good position for on-the-job training. It's the worst type of position for on-the-job training. And for that reason, I'll be voting no on the substitute motion.
For the debate, hearing Senator Pierce.
Mr. President, to debate the substitute motion.
You have the floor.
You know, Senators, I'll be short. I hear there's meatloaf down in the lunchroom and time to speed us up. But I think we send a good message to the citizens of the state of Idaho that we'll miss lunch to do their work and do it right. You know, I want to make some comments that I think that maybe haven't been said yet. I've been working on this almost 8 months. I've been involved in this from right after you've heard of the Republican convention. I haven't wanted to bring it here. I apologize to you that it is here. We have done our best to keep it here. I've gone to the Attorney General and offered to put that in my drawer, so it didn't show up here. I've been to leadership half a dozen times, starting clear back in September, asking them to help us with this because I could see it was going to be something we didn't want to be involved in. You know, this is the process, Senators, whether we like it or not, this is the process. We're using it right, and I think we're vetting it well. I want to congratulate my committee. They're not a rubber stamp committee, and I appreciate that. There's 7 chairmen on my committee out of 9 members. so they're not brand new. They're not being influenced by the things. I think everyone individually made up their own minds. I've heard the word sour grapes here, and I don't feel like that's appropriate in our discussion. I want you to know I did not talk to any groups at any time until late in the summer. And then they began to contact me. Most of the information I received early on was from my committee. I wish I could tell you all that I knew. I've sat down with Joan individually and had a visit with her just less than a month ago. And so I just ask, I guess the rest of my committee is asking also, you just trust us. Just trust the way we see it. You know, there's a fear. I think the Senator from 14 debate was very appropriate in the sense that our people are speaking to us. My emails, my phone calls, my letters are running better than 10 to 1, maybe 12 or 14 to 1. I've received many, I guess maybe because I'm chairman. There's a fear and a dissatisfaction with Fish and Game. People feel like it's time to turn a corner. There's a fear of some environmentalism involved here. The sportsmen are saying we're worried. Those are who we represent. We represent the people, and that's who I'm getting the word from. You know, there has been some major coaching take place. You've heard two different stories. You've heard stories from June. You've heard stories from July. You've heard stories from August. You've heard stories from December and from January. I just want you to be aware that you've seen a wide diversion of stories involved, and so be careful how you do those. Senators, this has been vetted and vetted and vetted. I just ask you to trust the decision of the committee. I hope you'll vote no on this motion. Thank you.
Further debate?
Mr. President.
Senator Baird.
Mr. President, to debate the substitute motion. Vote against it. Senators, this has nothing to do, my decision anyway, has nothing to do with emails, has nothing to do with flyers, has nothing to do with gender, has nothing to do with bias or prejudice. My decision is based upon common sense. I sat in my office and last week and over the weekend I gave this thought, and this morning again I thought, what criteria makes a person well informed? And I came up with 3 words: experience, knowledge, and integrity. After I had jotted those down as part of my debate, I got to looking through some of the statutes, and I looked at the electrical board requirements to serve on that board, on morticians, dentistry, podiatry, plumbing, nursing, potato, wheat commission, medical board, and there is a common thread going through them. In fact, 2 of those boards use the words specifically, shall be qualified by experience, knowledge, and integrity. To me, that is the definition of well-informed. And I want to talk a little bit about the difference between knowledge and experience. Knowledge in the dictionary says, and I quote, and I didn't write down the dictionary reference, Mr. President.
Close enough. Senator may read.
Thank you for your indulgence. What is known in a particular knowledge is the definition of what is known in a particular field or in total, facts and information. Knowledge can be acquired by reading, studying, and learning from others. Experience, on the other hand, has this definition: active participation in events and activities leading to a skill, a lesson taught by experience. For example, a carpenter with experience in roof repair. There is a difference between knowledge and experience. Ms. Herlock has knowledge. I believe that it started out small, but she has learned and has gained knowledge. It's the experience component that I'm concerned about. Let me tell you a story. When I graduated from college all those years ago, I had a degree in farm crops and farm management science. And I thought that I knew a great deal about soils and chemicals and irrigation and agricultural management. I graduated with a really good GPA for a farm boy, a 3.8, and I thought I knew how to farm. And boy, am I grateful that I had a father with an extreme amount of patience and understanding. I had learned in some of my classes that in Western lands it is hard to get enough water in certain places to make the crops grow. So in my infinite wisdom, the first year I farmed after I'd bought 478 acres from my dad, and he'd helped me secure the financing, we planted a wheat crop. It grew, and I thought to myself, I'm not going to get behind in the water. I'm going to water this crop good. So with my little emerging seedlings, I put on water, a lot of water, way, way too much water. And as a result, the nitrogen was washed down through the soil profile below where the roots could get it. That year, my dad, on his several thousand acres, harvested about 100 bushel the acre. My wheat acres, about 50. It was such a devastating financial problem for me that Dad was forced me, justifiably so, to become a partner in his business, and he assumed my debt because he was a kind father, and when we made it go. I don't question Ms. Herlock's integrity. She's bright, intelligent, smart, and she has gained great knowledge. However, whether there is the needed experience to fully understand the complicated hunting and wildlife issues that the commissioners face, I wonder about. There's a lack of experience, perhaps, that would help her to understand the deep-rooted feelings that hunters have about hunting issues. I wonder if she's ever witnessed, for instance, a starving deer in the wintertime to understand how important it is to winter feed in some instances. I wonder if she's ever sat on the top of a high mountain ridge at daylight after having walked miles in the dark to get to that special hunting spot, only to have an ATV moments later drive by and scare the game away. Experience brings understanding to the ATV issue. I wonder if she has the experience with farmers who regularly and consistently have elk and deer trample and consume their crops. Has she seen how the landowner appreciation tag program doesn't work? That program that was designed to reward farmers, at least in some small way, a tag as payment for some of those damaged crops. Just as experience is a requirement for the electrical board and the plumbing board, common sense teaches me that experience, coupled with knowledge and integrity, will provide a foundation for a commissioner to be successful. Experience is different than knowledge, and I just wonder about Ms. Herlock's experience. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further debate? Hearing no further, Senator Schmidt.
Your indulgence, Mr. President. I'm sorry it's late, but I have if Senator from 23 would submit to an inquiry.
Senator Brackett, would you respond to an inquiry?
Mr. President, certainly.
Senator Schmidt for the inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. President. The inquiry for Senator has to do with the lady's membership on a Republican committee, which looks to me like might be an issue.
Senator Brackett.
Mr. President, Senator from 5, Ms. Herlock has been a Central Committee person on the Republican Central Committee in Twin Falls County. I think at one time she held an office, but it's also my understanding that she has resigned from that office.
Thank you.
Further debate? Senator Lacey.
Mr. President, debate for the substitute motion, and I'll be very brief. I'm on the committee, and I went into that meeting not knowing which way I was going to vote until I heard the testimony. And what I came away from very much is, number one, that she's very strong, and I think tough might be the word. She knew she was headed for a wreck, and she stood up and came anyway. She seemed, very intelligent. She's made herself familiar with the laws. She's read probably more than most of the Fish and Game Commissioners have. And I looked at it maybe from a different way than some of the others. I look at it that the commission is like a board of directors. They're to guide and to lead the Fish and Game Department. And, looking back in my experience, as a food banker, if I would have all food bankers on our board of directors, we would go nowhere. Instead, we had a president of a food company. We had a marketing specialist. We had a fundraising specialist. We had a very diverse amount of different people in there to make the food bank stronger. And I think this is the case here. We need to look at what she brings to the table. Now, the last 2 years, because I was on resources on the House side, we've heard the Fish and Game talk over and over again. We need the youth. We need to bring the youth to the table. We're losing the youth. She has the passion for bringing the youth to the table. I think she has a passion for our wildlife. I think she presented herself very well. I think based on the statute, she is very well qualified, and I have no qualms in voting to accept her. Thank you.
Further debate? Hearing no further debate. Senator Hyder.
Did I vote a second time?
You're debating for the first time, Senator.
Oh, yes, that's true on the amended motion. To debate the first time.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be very brief. Good senators, I would remind all of us that in our form of government, we have 3 branches of government. We have 3 branches for a reason. We have an executive branch, we have a legislative branch, and we have a judicial branch. That system of checks and balances is very, very important to the process. If it weren't for that system of checks and balances, the gentleman on the second floor could appoint anyone to any commission. He could make all the laws. There'd be no reason for any of us to be sitting here today if the gentleman on the second floor had all the answers to all the questions. The legislative and the judicial branches would not be necessary. Part of that responsibility is to confirm appointments that are made. I would like to tell you just a quick story similar to what the senator from 31 mentioned, and that is I used to think of myself as a great horseman. I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars buying good horses, training good horses, breeding good horses. I thought I was the great horseman. Until one morning I had a colt, about 6 months old. But when I'd walk in the corral with him, he'd turn on me and try to kick. Or he'd try to sneak up behind me and nip me. And it frustrated me so bad that I went next door to a real horseman, a man that trained quarter horses, trained cutting horses, and this guy was a real cowboy. And he came over to my place, and in 5 minutes, he had that colt doing exactly what I would have wanted that colt to do. He knew exactly how to get that colt's attention. He knew that he didn't hurt that colt. He trained that colt for me in a 5-minute period. I never had another problem with that colt. I learned that day that there's a difference between a guy that's read about training horses and spent money on horses and a guy that really knows how to train horses. I submit to you that we need those kind of people on the Fish and Game Commission. People that know the issues and are important, but people that have been in the mountains, people that have experienced hunting and fishing firsthand are the most important asset we have. We have good people like the senator from 35 and the senator from 23 who probably know more about LAP tags than the rest of us will ever know in a lifetime. And they can't come to a conclusion of how to solve the problems that exist with LAP tags. Someone that has no knowledge in that area will not be an asset to the state of Idaho. Good senators, I appreciate the opportunity of this debate today. I think it's been worthwhile, regardless of the outcome. Isn't it wonderful to be a part of the process? Thank you very much.
Further debate? Hearing no further debate, Senator Brackus recognized closed debate.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for all the senators for participating in the debate. Good debate. thank you all for listening. It has gone on a long time. So I'll keep this short. I would like to respond to just a few of the issues raised. The good senator from 35. He is passionate. But that is not in the listed in as a qualification. You know, many times being a Fish and Game Commissioner is more difficult than being a legislator. They're expected, as we were and are, expected to know everything about everything. You know, the freshmen, the new appointees, they're on a learning curve. We in the legislature are on a learning curve. I would submit, though, as far as the qualifications, again, it's not more qualified, it's not most qualified, it's qualified. And the interview committee had the opportunity to examine that in depth, and that was the criteria that they used at that time. If we want different criteria, we should change the statute. And quite frankly, well, it'd be a long list of what we would think should be in the statute to determine qualifications. But still, if that is an issue, we certainly should consider that. Senator from 32, I really appreciate your comments. And yes, we do have a constitutional amendment to protect our right to hunt, fish, and trap. Thanks in large part to my seatmate, Senator from 24. But senators, we need more than just that constitutional right. We need more recruits. We need more youth getting involved. Joan Hurlock is committed to that. It would be, I think, a very welcome addition to the Fish and Game Commission to have that level of commitment. We've talked about it for a number of years, but for the survival of hunting as we know it, we're going to have to get more youth involved sooner. Senator from 14. As far as bringing, the sportsman groups together, I submit to you that 50% of or near that, are going to be opposed, 50% for, on any given issue. Always have been, or always will be competing issues. I would just offer a word of advice, and that is do not get in the middle of an argument between archery hunters and black powder hunters. It won't end well. Those are the kind of issues that Fish and Game deals with, and there is no right and wrong, but it's a matter of balancing. I would also add that this is not a lifetime appointment. If we approve confirmation of Joan Hurlock in a little over 3 years, she'll be up for reappointment. You know, we can reassess, and we will at that time. In the meantime, out of a committee of 7, one person, and I submit either, no matter how good or how bad, is not going to carry the day if the other 6 are doing their job. Senator from 27. This is difficult. As I said, we have friends on both sides, and I intend to stand with my friends. I'm getting supportive emails from other sportsman groups. I've got them from Safari Club, from trout fishing groups. And I would remind you that there were representatives from 2 sportsman groups, Sportsmen for Fish and Wildlife and ISCAC. Again, represented over 15,000 sportsmen. Mr. President, with that, I will make a few closing comments if I could close the debate.
Senator, this is your closing debate.
I will continue. We're starting to repeat ourselves, and I apologize for that. A lot of good points. So I won't repeat any more. I admire Joan Hurlock for her commitment and courage. The easy thing for her to have done would have been to withdraw her application. The easy thing for the Senate to do would be to accept the committee report and reject her appointment. Let's not do the easy thing. Let's do the right thing and vote to confirm her appointment. Senators, there's an important principle for sportsmen. It's fair chase. An important principle for the Senate is fair play. The Senate should not be a party to an unfair process that attempted to skew the confirmation process. The Senate should not reward bad behavior in the confirmation process. I ask for your vote to confirm Joan Hurlock to the Fish and Game Commission. Thank you, Mr. President.
Debate being closed, the question before the Senate is, shall the substitute motion be accepted? The effect of the passage, Senator Brackett.
Mr. President, I request a roll call vote.
The senator is supported. The effect of this roll call vote, Senators, before we start the roll call vote, will be the substitute amendment will be adopted and the report of the committee will be null and void, and that report will be passed on to the governor and the process will be completed. The secretary will call the roll.
Bear? Bayer? Bach? Brackett? Buckner-Webb? Cameron? Davis? Durst? Fulcher? Getty? Guthrie? Hagedorn? Hyder? Hill? Johnson? Keogh? Lacey? Lakey? Lodge? Martin? McKenzie? Mortimer? Nonini? Nuxel? Patrick? Pierce? Rice? Schmidt? Sidaway? Stennett? Thane? Tippett? Fick? Work? Winder? Davis? Durst? Johnson?
Mr. President.
Senator Johnson.
Having not debated.
60 seconds, Senator.
60 seconds. Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, good senators, I'd like to thank you for that debate. I deeply appreciate that, and it gives me a sense of honor and pride to serve with you, and I think it's wonderful that we can have these debates and do them in a civil manner. I called a couple of Fish and Game commissioners that I've known personally for a long time, and I asked them some tough questions. And I'm making my decision based on the feedback that I received from them and from sportsmen locally in my part of the state. The senator is going to vote aye.
Senator Johnson will be recorded as voting aye.
Nonini? Rice? Schmidt?
Roll call shows 16 ayes, 19 nays. The motion has failed. Senate, the original motion is before us. Debate is open on the committee report to appoint Joan Hurlock. Further debate on the committee report. Hearing no further debate, Senator Hyder is recognized to close debate.
Thank you, Mr. President. The debate is closed. I call for the vote and roll call vote.
Senator is supported. The question before the Senate is, should the Senate adopt the committee report rejecting the appointment of Joan Hurlock to the Fish and Game Committee? The Secretary will call the roll.
Bear. Bayer. Bach. Brackett. Buckner-Webb. Cameron. Davis. Durst. Fulcher. Getty. Guthrie. Hagedorn. Hyder. Hill. Johnson. Keogh. Lacey. Lakey. Lodge. Martin. McKenzie. Mortimer. Nonini. Nuxall. Patrick. Pierce. Rice. Schmidt. Sidaway. Stennett. Thane. Tippett. Vick. Work. Winder. Durst. Lakey.
Roll call shows 19 ayes, 16 nays. A majority have voted in the affirmative. The committee report has been adopted. The governor should be so notified. Senator Davis.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the Senate return to the fifth order of business.
Without objection, the Senate will return to the fifth order of business. Presentations of petitions, resolutions, and memorials. Senate's at the fifth order of business.
Thank you, Mr. President. Personal privilege, if I may.
You have the floor.
Mr. President, Senators, the Lincoln Day celebration that we had set for today, we're going to do that on Wednesday morning instead. And so we will soon recess till 4 p.m. this afternoon. And prior to recess, I ask if there are introductions or announcements.
Announcements. Senator Schmidt.
Actually, Mr. President, for an introduction.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I'd like to introduce to the body my daughter, Maddie Schmidt, visiting from the Palouse. She appreciated the debate. She appreciated the decorum and the process we had. Please welcome her.
Senator Martin.
Mr. President, for introduction.
You have the floor.
In the gallery, we have Albert Gay Call and his lovely wife, Karen, who are constituents in my district. Gay was here for the Lincoln Day process, but we'll gladly come back on Wednesday and be part of that at that time. Welcome to the gallery.
Senator Brackett.
Thank you, Mr. President, for an announcement.
You have the floor.
Transportation Committee will have a short meeting at 1:15.
Further announcements. Senator Lodge.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good Senators. Senate Judiciary Committee will meet at 2 o'clock. Thank you.
Further announcements. Senator Hill.
Thank you, Mr. President. The members of the Senate, we have the proofs for the committee photographs. They are in the Sergeant at Arms office. If any of you want to order any, she also has order forms, and again, the proofs are there. And also, I neglected to mention it Friday, but last Saturday was Senator McKenzie's birthday, if you'll join me in celebrating that with him.
Further debate, further announcements. Senator Davis.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senators, the only things we'll be doing at the 4 o'clock hour will be moving the legislation around and going through the reading calendars. We will not be going to the 13th order of business. We will not be returning to the 10th order of business. Mr. President, I move that the Senate recess till the hour of 4 p.m. this afternoon.
Senator Stinnett.
Mr. President, I second the motion.
Been moved and seconded. The Senate recess till 4 p.m. today. All in favor say aye. All opposed nay. The ayes have it. We are in recess.